Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, as someone that wants to visit the United States in the not too distant future, I thought this would be a very fun video to react to, and that is the 25 common misconceptions about the United States that simply are not true. So without any further delay, let's get into it. This should be fun. Looking forward to this one.
The United States often draws a lot of flack from the rest of the world for everything. From its foreign policy to the way it runs its domestic affairs. In fact, it seems like there are few things that can divide the world more evenly and more strongly than asking people what their opinion is of the United States. Everyone has an opinion. Even in the same city, you'll meet people who fall on the extreme sides of the spectrum.
Right.
But what is it exactly that causes America to be so messed up? Even America's own politicians can't seem to stop talking about how messed up things are. Well, today we're going to take a deeper look. Are things really as bad as everyone seems to think they are?
Is that truly the opinion? Because in South Africa, we don't see America as messed up. America seems to have their orders, intact, at least way more than we have back home in South Africa. So I don't necessarily have that misconception. But yes, of course, we do know that the political climate in the United States is very tense. But I don't have the opinion that it's messed up there.
Like with this 25, and these are 25 common misconceptions about the United States that simply aren't true.
Let's go, baby.
And as a very important note, this list was produced by both a United States citizen and 2 European citizens that relocated to the United States.
That is interesting.
It's written to be as fair as possible. No, I'm not 2 Europeans. Or am I?
No, you're not.
All right, let's begin with a really common thought. Americans are ignorant about the world. Americans are held to an unrealistic standard. Since the rest of the world watch our movies and listen to our music, They know a lot about our country. But let's be honest, they never studied it. People actually complain that Americans don't even know that Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore. But neither does half the United Kingdom, and they're on the same continent. It turns out that all of us are pretty bad at geography. You'd think America would be better at it, however, considering another common thought is that America spends its day spying on everyone. And that's true, but who doesn't? Germany, France, Switzerland, Japan, Iceland, and all the rest of us spy on each other and ourselves. Moving on, America.
So I just want to comment on this one and tell you guys what my opinion is, and that is definitely an opinion that we have in South Africa about Americans, because we know everything about America, yet America doesn't know, let's say, that much about, let's say, the African countries. But what he says is a true fact. We have American, culture on our screens. We watch Hollywood films. We know about America because it's shown on our television screens, where you can't really hold it against the average American if he doesn't have a worldly view on some smaller countries across the world, because it's not pushed in their face. So that's actually a good point.
It has been called racist. Please don't take this the wrong way. Racism definitely exists, and it makes the news. But you know what else? America also has a vicious media, and all of the world watches it.
It's true.
Sometimes more than their own media. So when something super bad happens in other countries, it might not even make the back page.
Right.
Next, it's a common misconception that Americans don't...
I don't want to pause this too often, but that is also very true. Obviously, I'm from South Africa, so we also have our history as far as racism is concerned. And I think what he says is very valid. When something, happens in America, it's blown to such a proportion that maybe it creates an impression that that is how everyone acts, when actually it was an isolated incident. So it's a pretty good point.
Don't use public transport. While it's true that we use cars a lot, many regions in America have great public transport.
Right.
Or at least just as good as Europe. Besides, what good is a train if nobody can afford it? We're looking at you, UK. Moving on. America does /has/is fill in the blank. America is far from being a unified entity. Each state has its own laws, cultures, and quirks.
Wow,
some states have the death penalty. Some don't. Some have strict gun laws, and some don't. Some have free college, some don't. Some have tax, and yeah, some don't. So just like you can't say Europe is so-and-so, you can't say the same about the US.
Right. I find that actually very fascinating that each state, governs by its own rules. And that almost makes it so interesting how every state is so different. That's what makes me want to visit the United States so much, because from one point of the United States to the other, it's completely different culture, different way of living. It's so diverse, and that's what makes it such a beautiful country to potentially visit. I cannot wait for that.
As an additional note, the states are far more independent than many of us realize. In fact, every state even has its own military, known as the Guard. Furthermore, some states pass legislation that directly contradicts the federal government. This is because in the US, the federal government is not the highest authority, the states are.
Oh, yeah.
To further establish the fact that America isn't a single entity, many believe that Americans only speak one language. But that's no different from the rest of the world. Have you ever been to France, or the UK, or Italy, or how about China? Most of them only speak one language too. That being said, over 20% of the US is bilingual. Now,
the one thing I'll counter that with is that many countries are bilingual, because English is a universal language. So as a golden standard, you should know English if you want to be able to travel across the world. Whereas also each country generally has its own home language. If you're not, an English home nation, for instance, in South Africa, we speak multiple languages, not just English. English is simply, one of the languages that I speak. So I understand his point of view, but I wouldn't necessarily fully go with saying most of the countries in the world can only speak one language.
Let's talk about the military, because people outside the US will preach that America's military does, again, fill in the blank. Nobody is naive enough to think that the US doesn't have selfish interests in mind when it invades a country. There isn't a nation on earth that would do that selflessly. But whenever the bad goes down, it's just as common for other countries to complain that America should do something. On a more or less lighter note,
by the way, the US military is my favorite military in the world by a long way.
Americans are fat. You ever been to the UK lately? There are even scandals because obese patients are getting turned down for surgery. Yes, America does have an obesity problem, but not all citizens are involved in it. I am. A big part of the United States is fairly health conscious and is consistently working to help the overweight population better their lives. Thanks, healthy people. And while we aren't perfect, many complain that America is worse than other developed nations in, well, everything.
That's not
There
true.
are many statistics, child mortality, literacy, etc., where the US falls behind countries like Norway and Iceland. But those statistics are based on averages. In Norway, most of the 5 million inhabitants are rich, white, and Norwegian. If you took a similar sample of rich, white Americans in the US, you would find that the statistics are almost exactly the same. The fact is that the US is hugely diverse, and the American experience is completely different with and without money. Translation? The problem isn't healthcare or education, it's economic inequality, almost exclusively. And speaking of inequality, many make the simple but powerful assumption that America just isn't safe. This is usually what foreign citizens say until they actually come here. By this same logic,
Again, this is something I've got no comments on. VOB from South Africa, we got one of the highest crime rates ever. So I definitely cannot comment on, the American safety. But I guess like any place, there's going to be areas that are, more safe than others. And as a local, you know where to go and where not to go. So I've definitely got no comment on American safety. That's not a misconception that I've necessarily ever had.
Paris, Brussels, London, Madrid, and almost every other city in Europe is unsafe as well. Yes, there are guns, but most Americans have never seen or heard a gun being fired. Right. In fact, most Swiss citizens are much more familiar with gunfire than us Americans. All this being said so far, people still expect all Americans to relish in a life of our stereotypes. Guns, fast food, and freedom! What I'm saying is a lot of the world looks at America as overly patriotic. But here's an honest question. Have you ever met a Russian, Australian, a proud member of the UK? There's no shame in having pride in your country. Us Americans are definitely patriotic.
Absolutely.
But so is the rest of the world. As they should be.
Yep.
It's not a crime to be proud of where you came from. But that doesn't stop others from thinking we only complain and boast about America whenever we travel abroad.
I think that is, honestly, of course he's exaggerating there, but I feel like that is one of the great traits about the average American, is how patriotic and how proud of their country they are. And I think that's something that has to be maintained. As soon as, younger generations lose that pride in their country, that is when, non-stability, whatever, starts to occur. So I think it's really good to have some pride for your country, to be honest.
This is largely anecdotal. In America, Americans like to complain just like the rest of us. Only a few of them ever even leave the country, so you're meeting an unrepresentative sample.
Right.
But in their defense, many times, they're right. Yes, this can hit hard in the pride spot, but maybe Europeans could stand to smile a bit more, right? No? Okay, fine, back to the apathetic, leave me alone face. By the way, that part was written for our European representative, by our European representative. I love all of you. Anyways, statistics viewed by outsiders show that the US is lagging behind. Similar to topics we've already discussed, there's another factor that we have to take into account: reporting. Every nation reports its own statistics. This means that making statistical comparisons between two developed nations, like the US and the UK, is an exercise in futility. The data is just too close and won't reveal much except that the US counts people one way and the US counts them another.
Right.
That still doesn't make this misconception true. Americans are fake. Here's the thing.
Americans are fake?
In Europe, citizens are almost proud of the fact that they're really standoffish. But once you get to know them, they're your friend for life. Well, here's a newsflash. Once you get to know an American, they'll also be your friend for life. The thing is, though, they don't use this as an excuse to be a jerk in the beginning. This list sounds great coming from an American. I was totally the one who should have read this one, but I digress.
So
on a totally
far, so
different
good.
but very popular misconception, Americans are the only ones who call football soccer. Actually, a lot of the world calls it soccer. Even parts of Ireland still call it soccer. Oh, what do I mean by still? I'm glad you asked. It was actually the British who coined the term soccer. The word soccer is an abbreviation of association and first appeared in universities in the 1880s, sometimes using the variant spelled soccer with a K. The word is sometimes credited to Charles Refford Brown, an Oxford University student said to have been fond of shortened forms such as brekkers for breakfast and rugger for rugby football. Britain actually started using the word football in the late 20th century, possibly because people incorrectly saw it as an Americanism. This next one, Tristan couldn't believe. Could you not?
No.
I'm learning something. To our American viewers, did you know that people in Europe make fun of you for using air conditioning? Why do they need it? Why don't
Wait, what did you say? It's people make fun of who? Let me replay that.
American viewers, did you know that people in Europe make fun of you for using air conditioning? Why do they need it? Why don't they just leave the window open? Mosquitoes? At least
Right.
in Florida. But here's why they might be joining us soon. During the 2003 European heatwave, 70,000 people died. This was in large part due to the fact that European homes and buildings are not typically equipped with air conditioning.
Right.
While they laugh at the Americans for this, hotter summers are going to force them to take appropriate measures, especially since children and the elderly are very susceptible. Again, I stand by mosquitoes. I'm not opening my window in the summer. Winter, absolutely, open windows.
Yeah, I mean, in South Africa, our homes generally, there's no heating and there's no air conditioning. However, obviously some homes do equip air conditioning because, summers definitely are quite warm, but you can get by without it, except during the cold months, you're uncomfortably cold, and during the very hot months, you sometimes lie uncomfortably hot. But if I had the choice, I would 100% have an air-conditioned home, let me tell you. It just takes a lot of power, I believe.
Moving
Quite
into the top
expensive.
9. That's a weird number. Top 9. Many parts of the world accuse the United States of accounting for 25% of the world's carbon emissions. Not so nice. But it also accounts for 25% of the world's economic activity. The truth is that several nations, including countries like Canada, have higher per capita emissions than the US.
That's interesting.
Next, let's talk about how the world thinks Americans are ruining English. Actually, both British English and American English have diverged from a common 16th century ancestral standard, and in some ways, American English is closer to the original than British English. For example, American English has, for the most part, retained the language's rotosity, pronunciation of the R in words like hard, while British has, for the most part, dropped it. Furthermore,
I find that funny because people also accuse us South Africans of not pronouncing, the R. We say water, car, all those sort of things. Instead of water and car, we say water, car. So we also suffer from the same thing. And he definitely makes a good point, because if you had to listen to British slang these days, you can't even understand what the British youth are saying these days with all their slang. The language is completely changed. So I can maybe get behind him on this one for sure.
this shift in British English happened around the time of the American Revolution, when wealthier Londoners wanted to distinguish themselves from the lower classes. This is only one example, but it goes to show that British English is not an unchanging standard any more than American English. On a totally different note, did you know that Americans don't all live in the suburbs? Nope, not true. The fact is that in America, you have plenty of people that live in cities like New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, and the list goes on. In fact, several regions of the United States are very European, like the Northeast Corridor, for example. The difference between the US and Europe is that if you want to live in the suburbs in the US, you can, but you don't have to.
Right.
Now, this next one is just offensive. Americans are all dumb rednecks.
Who says
While
that?
there are certainly Americans who fit this stereotype, the vast majority don't. Most Americans live in cities near the coasts. Most of them are educated, and most of them are not very different from Europeans in any significant way. Every country has a less educated populace that they themselves make fun of. Even sophisticated nations like Sweden and Switzerland. Fair warning, the last 5 on our list get a bit dark and crazy, starting with the idea that America is imperialistic. In many parts of Europe, the United States is seen as an aggressive imperial power, even more so than Russia and China. This is largely because our military presence both in Europe and everywhere else. But in our strong defense, Americans never forced you to watch our movies, quarter our soldiers, obey our laws, or get permission to leave your own countries. It was the Russians that did that, and much, much more. Food for...
To be honest, I guess the general opinion, back home of the United States is that they're very, very powerful, and they won't necessarily get involved if they don't have to, and they're definitely not a country to be messed with. So I see them as a country that's respected because you don't want to be on their bad side. And I think that's a good thing. For the strength of the world, it's imperative that we have a strong America. With great power comes great responsibility, and America's responsibility is to be strong, because when America's strong, the cracks of evil, don't seem to exist over the world. As soon as America shows some slight bit of weakness, whether it's true or not, that's when you start to see other countries trying to get away with things. So I do not mind America coming across as a strong, powerful nation, because that is what they are.
For thought, after World War II, the Americans liberated and left. The Russians liberated and stayed.
Right.
All right, number 4 is sure to be a shocker to a lot of foreigners. Americans don't actually all walk around with guns. It's just not true. Except for a few places, the only people you'll ever see carrying guns in America are the police. In fact, you'll see more people walking around with guns in Switzerland than you ever would in America. Okay. We admit
I didn't
that,
have
like
that
most
misconception.
stereotypes, there is some truth to this next one, but it's been wildly blown out of proportion. Americans are all crazy Christian right-wingers. Something so right about saying it with that accent. Yes, there are a lot of Christians in America, and while some of them are crazy right-wingers, Most of them aren't. In fact, if you ever get a chance to go and stay with one of those crazy Christian families, you'll see that most of them are just genuinely sweet people that go to church on Sundays. This next one sounds like a legit stand-up joke. If you get injured and can't pay for it, you'll just die in the street. Yeah, many people in Europe think this is what happens in America. As with most things that concern America, they're wrong. You can't be denied emergency medical care in the US. That would go against the Hippocratic Oath. The difference is that you get a bill in the mail a few months later. Of course, debt is another issue, but let's get into that right now. Americans are all in debt. Actually, European citizens carry more debt than Americans. The average household debt in the US, OECD, is 113% of the household's income. In the UK, it's 156%. In Sweden,
Wow.
173%.
Wow.
And in Denmark, it's a whopping 305%.
305.
So, what are some misconceptions about the US that you'd like cleared up? Or do you live in America and want to put a stereotype to rest? Let us know in the comments below, or tweet your answer to us at list25.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, that actually was a very, very fun and, just to be honest, interesting and educational video for me. There were definitely some misconceptions that I did have that were pretty much cleared up by this gentleman in the video, so I definitely do appreciate that. And at the same time, there were many supposed misconceptions that I quite clearly never had of the United States. None of this puts me off my pending trip to the United States, where I'm going to do a road trip across many states. I cannot wait for that. But folks, that is all I have for you today. If you did enjoy this video as much as I did, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I am uploading every single day. But folks, until next time, I hope you have a good one. I'll see you when I see you. Cheers.